Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And today we are going to New York City, looking at New York's Metropolitan Museum as its reputation is eroding over its collection practices. Is that a bit dramatic or is it justified? Well, let's see. We'll go into it. We'll dive right in.
Well, it's eroding like a landslide off a cliff face here, so uh, I don't know if we've seen that kind of erosion except when a town is buried in mud.
Oh no. Little Joey
Uh,
fell off a rock slide?
yeah. So yeah, the big accusation against the Met Museum is that um, the vast majority of its collection, in a number of cases, is just straight up stolen, or at the very least has no records beyond it showed up in the warehouse one day.
Yeah, a lot of
Which
the
is
items in their collection have very scarce provenance. They don't really have the paperwork or documentation. There have been instances where even donated items to the collection were stolen or looted. It's not the best look when a good part of your collections have sketchy pasts.
yeah, and it's one of the things that always struck me as like how weirdly accepted a lot of this was, especially a concept that I found out about working a little bit with the Spurlock Museum down in uh, I can't remember the town,
Champagne
UIUC down in
Urbana.
Champaign, yeah, was just called was it discovered donations, where it's just we don't have paperwork on it, so we treat it as something that someone basically left on our doorstep and handed to us. It's like everyone was weirdly cool with that explanation
It was
for a
also
lot of things.
can also be referred to as an orphan collection as well.
Yep, orphan collection. Yep,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not
It
it's
was
not uncommon for people to, pass away and go, "What do I do with all my father's collection?" and just drop it off at a museum cuz why not? It belongs in a museum. Spent years collecting it and, with antiquities it's a little different because it's usually high-end collectors. It's usually very rich people who pay very high dollar for these items because of their history and because of where they're from, but a lot of times they're stolen, they're looted, or in probably the most unethical way that the Metropolitan acquired a lot of items was during periods of cultural chaos and turmoil within countries where a party comes into power and sells off all of its heritage, all of its history to the highest bidder,
yeah,
and the country loses that culture.
yeah, yeah. It's the sort of antiquities cash grab in order to basically buy your way into staying in power. But yeah,
Or to
back
fund certain activities as well, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. I'm not going to get into that because we're here to focus on the Metropolitan Museum of
Not
Art.
Hobby
And
Lobby?
no, we're focusing on the Met, the rich man's Hobby Lobby.
Okay.
uh, so with the Met here, it's a very big, very much esteemed organization, and has been for a lot of its history. And the Mets really running into its biggest issue because it only opened in 1880. It's only been around for like 140 years. And because of that, it is centuries younger and centuries smaller than the other major art museums of the world, such as the Louvre in Paris. And the Met sees itself as America's Louvre. Um, so naturally, it decided to do the most Anglican thing it could, uh, the most I should say most Anglo-Saxon thing it could, and
We must acquire
proceed to
everything.
just grab everything from everywhere all at once.
They went on a
Yes, I made an
massive
Oscars
buying spree.
reference 2 weeks late. Stop me.
They went on a buying spree, buying everything they could, large collections. One of the things that they prided themselves on was not a single decade of any civilization that took root on Earth is not represented by some worthy piece.
Yeah. Yes. In the 1960s, the Met had a director named Thomas Hoving, who strove to expand the Met's collection to make it a true competitor, a true comparison with museums like the Louvre by buying anything and everything he could find and asking absolutely no questions on where it came from.
Yeah.
The consequences of this are only just now, 60 years later, being felt, as for the past 30 years, it's been coming up more and more frequently that the Metropolitan Museum actually doesn't have the provenance, actually doesn't have the links in the chain from back to the country of origin, back to the site of origin for most of the stuff on display, which can make it really hard when you're trying to write a display about this Ming Voss and you have no idea what part of the Ming it comes from.
Yeah. And to say the museum took a laissez-faire approach to artifact smuggling and looting would be a bit of an understatement, considering they actually at times embraced it and would actively associate with figures that were who later went down and were in a lot of legal trouble for artifact smuggling.
Uh, yeah, there are a number of statistics throughout this article, any one of which by themselves is damning. I think my personal favorite probably is the first one because it's the museum basically shooting itself in the foot. The museum has a catalog of all the artifacts on display.
Yeah.
This catalog contains 1,109 pieces that were previously owned by people who are convicted antiquities smugglers, and less than half of this 1,109 piece catalog have any sort of record describing how it left its home country and ended up in New York City.
Oh, that is such a damning. Just
Yeah,
that alone is really damning.
yeah, yeah. 309 of these pieces can currently be seen by anyone buying a ticket today and walking into the Met. So it's not even just things in the back room that the Met is trying to keep quiet on and hiding with shame.
Actively displaying
Literally,
them.
it is literally everything in the museum. Like they're in, like half their damn catalog is from known smugglers.
God, yeah.
You know, this is like being a federal agent and half of your salary on your taxes just says Al Capone.
Well, and then if that wasn't damning enough, Hoving, who was the museum's director from 67 to 77, was credited with turning it to a world class museum, and he wrote that his address book of smugglers and fixers and other art world acquaintances was longer than anyone else's in the field, and being an accomplice to the art smugglers was necessary for being the Met's director.
Yep. Uh, Basically, he did what he did. He's not ashamed of it, and he was very, very proud of it, and basically considered everyone else a sucker for not doing as he did.
And that's a
Fun
great
fact:
place.
everyone else was doing as he did. He just did it on a massive scale.
And on that depressing note, I think that's a good point. We should wrap this up.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Before we do, though, uh, quote from the director of the Antiquities Coalition, which is a organization that tries to put a stop, tries to draw attention to these sorts of practices. Um, and I think it's very important that the Met, by doing this, became the gold standard for how museums should acquire artifacts, how museums should present themselves as world class museums. So the Met basically created this trend of if you're not robbing a foreign country of its history, you're not a museum, and that's actually quite horrifying.
Yeah, not the best thing in the world to be
Yeah,
happening.
that's important to set out is that the Met is the example that a lot of other museums that are getting in trouble have followed for what should be obvious reasons. The man literally said, "I did this by committing crime." Everyone else commits the same crime. You're all just committing crime.
I'm not guilty. Everyone's doing it.
Mm.
But yeah. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like. And be sure to check out the Humanitaire collections, which will be linked in the description down below. It's our web store that helps support the Trevor Project. So help us support a great cause by checking out the web store. Thank you guys for watching.